Hello, everyone. You're watching Inside the Americas. Coming up, Joe Biden set to end America's longest war, withdrawing all U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11th. That deadline in time for the 20th anniversary of the terror attacks that rocked the world. Then, as the George Floyd trial continues in Minneapolis, more protests break out as a white police officer and her police chief resign in the wake of the new killing of a black man. And a roller coaster ride through the mountains of Mexico. More on that rail journey 2,000 meters high coming up. I'm Jeannie Godula. The 9/11 era could finally be drawing to a close. This week, U.S. President Joe Biden said America would fully pull out of Afghanistan by this September 11th. That is, of course, a highly symbolic date for the U.S. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the terror attacks that were coordinated from Afghanistan. Fraser Jackson explains.
September the 11th, 2001, the deadliest terror attack on American soil, which would result in the longest war in American history. Behind the attack, terror group Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, a man protected by Afghanistan's ruling faction, the Taliban. Less than a month after the attacks, the U.S. begins bombing raids in the country.
These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime.
By the end of 2001, the Taliban are driven from power. But in 2003, the U.S. decides to invade Iraq, and the war in Afghanistan takes a back seat. In 2004, Afghanistan's first democratically elected president takes office, but the Taliban are not out of the picture. They wage a deadly insurgency. 2008 brings regime change in Washington, with Barack Obama promising to bring the troops home. But as violence increases, the U.S. is forced to send more and more soldiers into combat, totaling over 100,000 in 2009, plus 50,000 NATO troops. In May 2011, almost 10 years into the war, the Americans kill Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden in a compound in Pakistan. For Washington, the mission is accomplished and the withdrawal begins. But some American troops do stay behind, there to support the inexperienced Afghan forces tasked with fighting an ever-violent Taliban. Troop numbers fluctuated during Donald Trump's tenure, but in 2020, Washington signed a fraught agreement with the Taliban, which would start the withdrawal of U.S. troops on May 1st, provided the militants meet specific conditions. Joe Biden has now called for the final 2,500 U.S. soldiers to come home by the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks this September. The war in Afghanistan has outlasted 4 American presidents and has killed more than 3,500 coalition troops and 157,000 Afghans, including over 43,000 civilians.
The shooting death of another black man in the area around Minneapolis has pushed a suburban police officer and the head of the local police department to resign. 20-year-old DAUNTE Wright was killed Sunday during a traffic stop. His death inflamed protests surrounding the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former white police officer accused of killing George Floyd. Yuka Raye has the details.
Called and said he just got pulled over by the police.
The mother of DAUNTE Wright recounts her final phone conversation with her son moments before he was killed by a police officer.
And then when I called back, the girl that he had in the car answered the phone, and it was on a FaceTime. And she said, she was crying and screaming, and she said that they shot him. And she pointed the phone towards the driver's seat, and my son was laying there, unresponsive.
My Lord.
That was the last time that I seen my son.
Joining her and Wright's girlfriend, another bereaved family, that of George Floyd. They'd come out of the courthouse where Derek Chauvin's trial was taking place.
Minneapolis, you all can't sweep this under the rug anymore. We're here, and we will fight for justice for this family, just like we're fighting for our brother.
A so-called mistake, a handgun for a taser, it's unacceptable. You know, when is enough enough?
The Brooklyn Center police have said that the officer who fatally shot Wright during a routine traffic stop on Sunday had fired her gun by error, thinking it was a taser. That officer, Kim Potter, as well as the police chief, Tim Gannon, who came under fire for calling the event an accident, both resigned on Tuesday. The city's mayor said he hoped the move would help heal the community, but riot police and protesters faced off again for a third straight night as calls for justice and accountability continue.
Also this week, the U.S. pushed the pause button on the one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine. U.S. federal health agencies recommended the break for at least a few days after 6 women under 50 developed rare blood clots 1 to 2 weeks after getting the shot. Nearly 7 million doses of the J&J vaccine have been administered across the U.S. so far. President Biden says the decision shows the government's putting safety and science first. But it's another blow for the global vaccination effort, coming just weeks after the same concern was raised over the AstraZeneca jab. Well, that comes as people are lining up in Venezuela, not for vaccines, but for oxygen. These people outside a supply store in Caracas came with empty tanks to refill for family members sick with COVID-19. Hospitals in the capital are filled to the brink, so now many families are taking it upon themselves to help the sick at home. Things are bad in Chile as well. The country's been hit with a new wave of COVID-19, despite the fact that more than a third of the population has got at least 1 dose of the vaccine. The virus is spreading rapidly across younger parts of the population, and the emergence of new variants has made matters worse. Authorities have declared a new lockdown to stop the spread of the virus, as Wasim Cornet and David Gilberg report.
The summer break is a distant memory at the Viña del Mar beach. Tourists have come and gone, but residents of the province of Valparaíso have been left to deal with a major surge of COVID-19 infections.
The holiday permit allowed a significant number of people to travel to districts in our region. They came here looking for a festive spirit, a spirit of rest, relaxation, in order to disconnect after a very bad year.
Travel between different regions was authorized, and gyms and movie theaters were given the green light to reopen. Those are among several factors which have contributed to creating a major surge in infections, which has led authorities to usher in a new lockdown in most of the country. The president was also forced to delay an important election by 5 weeks. They were initially supposed to be held on April 11th.
We will work tirelessly so that on Saturday, May the 15th and Sunday, May the 16th, sanitary conditions will be more favorable. In this way, we will not put the health of the population at risk.
Hospitals are overwhelmed. The more contagious and more dangerous Brazil variant has driven up the number of patients in ICU units, especially those under 40 years old. The country, though, has deployed a huge vaccination campaign. 38% of Chileans have had a first shot, the third highest number worldwide. The problem is most of those doses are of the Chinese vaccine Sinopharm, and according to the latest study by the University of Chile, the efficacy is over 50% after 2 doses, but only 3% after 1 shot.
In the future, we might need some adjustment or change of vaccination schemes, which is totally logical, understanding that we are vaccinating at the same time that we are finishing clinical studies phase 3 and 4.
What appears as a scientific trial and error method, as well as the repeated loosening and tightening of restrictions, have sparked heavy criticism among the Chilean population. More than 24,000 people have died since the spring of last year in a country home to 19 million.
COVID hasn't stopped some tourists in Mexico, as you're about to discover, thanks to a roller coaster rail journey over 2,000 meters. That's 6,500 feet high. El Chepe is one of the country's few passenger trains running on a very limited schedule, but much to the delight of those on board. Catherine Kadir-Clifford takes a look.
All aboard for a journey through some of Mexico's most breathtaking landscapes. On tracks winding their way across the Barrancas del Cobre Canyon. The train makes an entrance as it pulls into the station to meet a crowd of excited tourists. It's only possible to board the El Chepe 3 times a week, so its arrival is always a festive event. It's all steam ahead for the next 600 kilometers. From the panoramic carriage, passengers take in the views from a height of 2,400 meters, speeding over bridges and through narrow gorges. This Mexican couple are taking their first ever train trip.
It's a very special feeling. In Mexico, there's nothing banal about taking the train. It's a unique experience.
El Chepe is one of Mexico's rare passenger trains, and the ticket inspector takes on a double role as guide.
We'll soon come to one of the highest bridges of the journey.
And it's the train driver who explains the name El Chepe.
So Che and Pe because we go from Chihuahua to the Pacific, linking the sea and the mountains.
The train crosses territory belonging to the Raramuri Indians. Descendants of the Aztecs, their towns and clothes are decorated with bright colours. They live mainly from tourism, making the most of the custom the train brings through their town.
Thanks to tourism, we have roads and electricity. We'd like the government to give us more opportunities. For example, to give us more jobs as guides.
Back on board, the views are just as awe-inspiring further along the canyon. Along its way, the train crosses 37 bridges, with the majority of its route inaccessible by car. It finally pulls into Los Mochis, the line's terminus, where passengers alight, elated from their dizzying journey.
We'll leave you now in Brazil, where a giant new Jesus statue is being built, even bigger than the iconic Christ the Redeemer in Rio. That statue has been the tallest in Brazil since it was built in 1931, but the new Christ the Protector statue in the southern city of Encantado will overshadow it by the end of the year. The head and the outstretched arms were added to the new statue this week. Once it's done, it will be 5 meters, or about 15 feet taller than the Rio landmark's total height, coming in at 43 meters or 140 feet overall. Its backers say the statue is meant to both inspire faith and encourage tourism in southern Brazil. We'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for watching Inside the Americas. We'll see you again next week for all the news from north to south.
In 2011, France 24 followed Big Sam and his men fighting Colonel Gaddafi's forces in the streets of Tripoli.
Once Martyrs Square had fell, we knew that the end of Gaddafi was close.
10 years on, our reporters caught up with Sam, now known as Hussam Najer, as well as supporters of General Haftar, the warlord who's been fighting the UN-recognized government. Gaddafi may now be just a memory, but Libya remains deeply divided.
Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval on France 24 and France24.com.